Hi guys, thank you so much for checking out this video. This is the third video in my series Maya for Beginners videos, and today I'm going to explain more how Outliner works, how channel box and attribute editor works. I'll explain how you can group objects, what sort of hierarchies you can have within different objects, and how you can combine and separate objects. And also we'll try to explain the concept of history. Hope it will be useful, and for this video I decided to use those cute animals. I did not model them myself. I got models from Adobe Substance assets. If you have a Substance Painter subscription, then you can just download them and use for your projects. So yeah, let's start. An outliner, it's where you can see and find everything that exists in your scene. At the moment, this is pretty empty scene, and I only have those two objects. The animals I imported from OBJ file and a cube I created, so I can see them in outliner. But also within your 3D scene, you will have much more objects than those you actually create. For example, by default I have all the cameras, or for default light set and default object set. It's just additional nodes that have some information about your scene, like default lighting or any other default settings. Outliner also have a search bar. Imagine if I have lots of different meshes and every mesh has the correct name, so I can go there and find the mesh I need. For example, I type animals, and you see it highlighted me that I have animals I can select. Then I click cross to cancel the filter by name. The other way to filter your objects by type in Outliner would be this show button. You can get show objects, and you can choose different objects that you want to see. For example, I only want to see geometry in my outliner, so everything else disappears. Now I only see my actual polygon models in outliner. I will need to go back show and clear below to clear all the filters. So basically show it's just a way to filter visibility of different objects based on their type. Display menu in outliner can show you more extra information about your scene. You can display additional nodes that exist in your scene or some hidden objects. You probably don't need to change anything right now. I'll show you. For example, right now I only see animal mesh if I select my animals, and if I go to display and click shapes, and now every object in Maya have a shape node. And now I can actually select shape node from my outliner. If I double click, I will also open them in attribute editor. But I don't need to see them in my outliner, so I'll disable it. So let's have a closer look at my animals that I just exported. When I select them, I select all of them together, and in my outliner I can see that this is just one mesh. Although all of them are separate meshes, but Maya showing me them just as one mesh. And this is something you can do in Maya. You can combine objects together to make one mesh, or you can separate them. Since they are already combined, let's separate them. If I click Shift and right mouse button, you'll see there is a separate and combine operations you can do with your meshes. So I click separate and see what happens. I have very many meshes in my outliner because Maya separated all the meshes that has their own geometries that doesn't connect to each other. For example, cat's eye is separate from cat, and the same with our rabbit. And you can see on mouse every little claw got separated too. So now let's fix that. I want to have my mouse as one object, my rabbit as another object, and my cat as a separate object. To do that, I'll click and drag a selection lasso around my mouse. In the tool settings, you can also check that you can raise a tool or check that camera-based selection is off. Otherwise, you'll only select half of the mouse. And then I will click Shift and right mouse button and choose Combine. Now I have my mouse as one object. Let's do the same with rabbit. I'll select every part of the rabbit and click Shift right mouse button and combine. And now we have rabbit. And the same with our cat. Select everything, Shift right mouse button and combine. Great. Now we have a cat, a rabbit, a mouse, and lots of empty transform nodes that we don't need. It happens because Maya still remembers that in the past they used to be separate objects. If I select all of them and go to Edit, Delete by Type History, all of these extra nodes that we just seen in Outliner disappeared, and Maya clears them out from our objects, and we only have these 3 objects in our Outliner. There's one useful hotkey you can use to delete history. If I undo what I just did to how my objects were before when they still had their history, and if I click Option Shift D, I can delete history from any selected objects. So now if I select rabbit, I click the Option Shift D. You can notice that nodes that were connected to rabbit disappeared now. And also you can use your polymodeling default shelf, and this button in the middle, it's delete by type history. You can choose any way that works better for you. I'll talk about history more a little bit later in this video, and let's just continue with our hierarchies. First of all, let's rename our new objects. To rename any object in your outliner, you just double-click left mouse button on your object, and this will be cube, mouse, rabbit, and cat. To select the multiple objects in Outliner, you just hold Shift, Command to deselect some of them. If you want to move objects around, you just use middle mouse button. You click and hold and drag objects around to rearrange them the way you prefer. And now when we know how to combine and separate your objects, there is another way you can keep your objects together by grouping them. I'll select these guys and I'll click Command D to duplicate them. I will explain more about how to duplicate in my future videos, but let's see what happens in Outliner when we duplicate our objects. You see Maya will add 1 to every duplicate. If I duplicate it again, it will be 2. The reason is because you can't have the same names in Outliner. It's always have to be a unique name for every object. And now let's select all of these guys and click Command G, and now we have group. So those are in a group and those are on its own. If I select one object that inside a group, I can really move this object or rotate or do whatever I want with it. In Outliner, I'll see that it would highlight the group, and you notice there is a little icon like a cross. If you click on it, it will expand the group and you'll see all the objects that currently inside your group. One of the ways to quickly find your object, by select rabbit, I move my cursor to Outliner and I click F. I will open the group and highlight the objects that you currently is selected within your 3D scene. Every group has its own pivot, and by default, when you group objects, you have pivot in the middle of your 3D world. And you can also reset pivot and have it in the middle of your group. And you can do the same operations with your pivot like you would do with any of your object. Like if I hold D, I can move it around, or I can snap it, and so on. Let's undo that and reset pivot. If you select an object in your 3D scene that is a part of a group, and now you want to select whole group, you can use arrows on your keyboard. Like arrow up would select whole group, and arrow down would select your first objects that you have in your group. If you want any object not to be part of this group anymore, you can click and drag it with middle mouse button, just outside, anywhere outside of your group. Now this little mouse is not a part of our group anymore. The other way to do it is to use the hotkey Shift P. So if I select rabbit, I click Shift P, and you see in Outliner now it's also not a part of our group anymore. So our group gets much smaller now. We only have a cat and a cube in it. Also, instead of selecting every object within your group, you can select the whole group. And you can just ungroup everything if you go to Edit. And you see under Hierarchy you have Group and Ungroup. And also parent and unparent. Those two I'm going to explain more next in this video. So I click ungroup for now, and my group disappears, and the cat, the mouse, and the rabbit and the cube are free to go their own way because they are not part of any group anymore. You can also have empty groups in Maya. For example, if the rabbit and the cat decided to establish their own group, I'll select them and click Ctrl G, and then later on they decided it doesn't work for them and they better to be without any groups. I will select them and click Shift P. Now you can see that I have empty group. It still has pivot, but there is no objects inside this group. Maybe this mouse and this cube now want to be part of this empty group I had before. I can click and drag them with middle mouse button, and now they have joined our group after the cat and rabbit have left it. What is the difference between parenting objects to each other and having groups? In a group, every object has freedom to do what they want. You can move them around, like in this one. If I decide to parent one object to another, first I need to select object that is going to be a child, then I will select parent object, then I'll click P. I parented cube to this object. So now you'll see in Outliner I have mouse, and if I click here, I will see that cube is parented to my mouse. Everywhere mouse goes, cube will follow. If I decide to rotate my mouse, the cube will also follow it. And the same if I decide to rescale my mouse. And now see what happens if I want to have rabbit as a parent object for my mouse. I select the mouse and then I select rabbit and I click P. And now we have rabbit as our parent object. I click here. I'll see the mouse is a child of the rabbit, and I click here, and the cube is a child of the mouse. It's very useful when you need to animate something, and let me just quickly show how it works. So now if I select rabbit and move it around, mouse and cube follow the rabbit. If I select mouse and move it around, cube will follow the mouse. If I select cube, no one follows the cube. Cube on its own. The way you can move rabbit separately from its children, by going to Tool Settings, check on Preserve Children option here. So now when I have it and I'm moving my rabbit, I can move my rabbit far away from children without changing the current hierarchy that I have. And if I uncheck it, everything goes back how it was before. So I move rabbit, and rabbit's children will follow. Any parent objects also can be part in the group. For example, let's group those two cats together. So now we have a cat group, and let's say our rabbit with mouse and with a cube want to join cat group, but keep their parenting hierarchy the same. So with middle mouse button, I can click and drag them inside our cat group. And now if I select cat group, I can move all of them together. I can move group on its own, and I can move my cats within the group. And I can also still move those guys separately, and because they are still part of the rabbit's family, let's call that, and all of them part of the same cat group that we have just created. And just as well, you can have different children of the same parent. Rabbit has a mouse as a child, and the mouse has a cube as a child. Maybe our mouse should have more children. So if I select all these cubes, they're not part of any group or any parenting relationship. And here's my mouse in Outliner. So I select all of them, and with middle mouse button, I click and drag them to just here. So now all of them are child objects to the mouse, and the mouse is a child object to the rabbit. So yeah, as you can see, this way you can build multiple relationships between different objects and combine them together in groups, or combine them together in some sort of parent relationship when you will connect their move, scale, rotate, and some other attributes to another parent objects. Now let's quickly look how we create new objects. As if you remember from my previous videos, when nothing is selected and you click Shift and right mouse button, Maya gives you different objects to choose that you can create and start modeling. Let's start with Good Friend Cube. Since this is one of the objects that I created in Maya, not imported it will have some settings that I can adjust to customize it and make it work for me better. If I click T, I will see this little window which gives me some extra settings I can use to change cube parameters. I can make it wider, I can make it I can change height, I can change width, I can add subdivisions on different sides of my cube. On the top right corner of this window, you will notice this little icon, and what it does, it increases or decreases the steps of the value you see here. For example, if I have it like that and I click and drag high, you see I move mouse quite a lot, but it only adds a little bit to the number value. And if I have it to the full, like that, then I click and drag, and it moves way more, and the value it's much higher than before. And now let's look at our attribute editor. So all the numbers I have just changed, all of them are within this polycube 1 node. This is a history node, and since I haven't removed the history from this object, I still have access to it, even if I start working more and doing more modeling around my object. If you create other objects, for example, let's delete this one and have something more interesting, for example, torus. And now we go to attribute editor polytorus 1, and there is different settings we can play. We can make it thicker, we can change subdivisions, and so on. Every object in Maya would have that sort of settings you can check. And now let me show you another tool that perhaps you will find more useful than move, scale, and rotate. If you click Ctrl T, you will get access to universal manipulator. You can also find it in the menu if you go to modify, transformation tools, and here universal manipulator. Sometimes it's a little bit more logical to use it rather than move, scale, rotate. You see there is little icons on the corners, so you can let me isolate it from our animals. So you see there is little icons on the corners that you can use, and you can scale it that way. You can rotate it, and you can see it also highlights you the exact degree of your rotation, for example. So you can play around with it, but I personally never use it because I prefer just switch between move, scale, and rotate. Okay, let's continue with attribute editor and look at other nodes. On top of attribute editor here, you see there is all the nodes that are connected to your object. The first one is transform node, and it shows you where your object is located within your 3D scene. Like if I move it, you see you have a translate, numbers change, and the same if I rotate it or if I scale it. May I also remember all the history that connected to this object. So if I want to reset all of these numbers, I can do it one by one. Like I can reset scale, and I can reset the rest, or I can go to modify reset transformation. And now I get my object back to the center of the world with all the transformations that I have done to it, resetted to back to 0 where it started. This node has all of this information and some additional information about pivots, parent connections, and so on. The next one is a shape node. Shape node also combine different information about your objects that in some cases might be useful, like a smooth mesh previews that we have seen, where you can toggle it here on and off. You don't really need to know everything it does right now. It is useful to know that there is always a shape node and there is always transform node for every object that exists in Maya. The next one is history node. This is what I have showed you before, where you can adjust settings and customize your shape to the way you want it to be. And the next two nodes in the attribute editor, it's connecting to renders and material setup. And again, it's something I'm not going to show you right now, but when I talk about rendering and texturing and UV, we will definitely look through some of the settings here. We also have channel box. In channel box and attribute editor basically show you the same information, only in slightly different ways. Channel box, it's more like reduced version of attribute editor, where you can have quick access to all the translate, rotate, scale settings, and to the history node where you can keep adjusting your object. There is different ways you can change values in channel box and in attribute editor. In the channel box, if you click with left mouse button and highlight the attribute you need, and then you go to your viewport and click and hold middle mouse button and move it to the right or to the left, you can have this interactive way to adjust numbers. And if you click and hold right mouse button inside this little window and move, it will only use the whole numbers without any in between, like 3, 4, 5. And if we go to attribute editor, let's go back to our history node. So for attribute editor, there is slightly different ways to change these values interactively. Of course, you can use this slider and just move it right and left, but there's other way to do it. If you click and hold Control and use left mouse button, right mouse button, and middle mouse button. So when you use left mouse button, every time you move it right and left, it will add 001 to the number. If you use Control and middle mouse button, click and hold Control, then click and hold middle mouse button and move it right and left, you would add 0.1 to that number. And if you use Control and right mouse button and move it up and left and right, you see you change, you basically add 1 value to this number. Let's for a second come back to parenting. Now when we are aware that every object has different translate nodes, let's see what happens when we parent one object to another. For example, I created plane and I created cone. Rotated plane, so now my plane has that angle. So currently my cone is placed in 0, 0, 0, translate and rotate and scale because I only created it and I haven't moved it yet. And watch what happens if I parent it to my plane, which I moved from the original place where it was created. I select cone, I select plane, and I parent them. Now my cone suddenly changed its translate and rotate numbers. The reason is because when you parent one object to another, a child object will inherit parent's attributes and will keep the same offset. So technically when I move it, it doesn't move. It just follow. It doesn't move within the space. It just follow the parent. Now if I select my cone and I change rotate orientation to 0, you see, it will rotate to exactly the same angle that a parent object has, just like that. And if I also reset its translates, it will go back to middle of my plane. If I select it and click Shift P to unparent, you see now it have its own translate and rotate back. So now if I click 0 and I move it to back to 0, it will go back to the middle of the world when it was created and originated in a 0, 0, 0 sort of place. There's a thing to remember that I mentioned in my previous video, but I'll just quickly repeat it. So that you can also freeze transformation. It will reset the position of your object, so Maya will see it as its origin, but you won't move it back to center of the world. If I go to modify freeze transformation, and now my plane get everything back to 0, and the world axis orientation as a object default axis orientation. So if I change it, it will be world or object, it will be exactly the same. And now let's talk a little bit about history. Let me create a cube again. So there's a place where you can see all the nodes together and how they connect to each other. If you go Windows and check Node Editor, you can select an object in Outliner and click Show Input and Output Connections. So here is our nodes. Here is our history node, here is our shape node, transform node, and our shading and rendering nodes. There is little icons here. If you double click on them, you can open and see all the different attributes that will be the same attributes you see in your attribute editor or in the channel box. So for example, let me show you something. I have this cube and now I'm thinking of making extrude. So I go to face, select on face and extrude it. And you see in Node Editor immediately I see there is a new node created, which is the extrude I have just done. And now if I go back to my history node and decided to change something with my cube, for example, here is a cube. So if I go back to my history node and decided that I want to add one subdivision level somewhere, let's say here, and something strange happens to my cube, it starts looking like that. The reason it happens because after that there is history that shows that I created extrude, and since I went back and changed something in the faces of the original cube, basically it changed the order of the faces and translate attributes and so on. So Maya still performed extrude on the top of the changes I have just done, but it gave me a rather unpredictable result. let's come back to that and let me show you something. And go to display polygons, component IDs, faces. This is just a good way to see how history works. You never need to use it like that when you model something, but you see every face has a number, like this is 0, 4, this is 7, and so on. When I went back to Polycube history node and changed my subdivision width from 1 to 2, so you see it just shifted the numbers. So it used to be that face 0 and now it's this face 0. Basically what happened is that Maya rearranged the faces and then used the information it has before on a polyexode face 1, which shifted to somewhere else, gave me this more unpredictable result. So yeah, I'll come back to Node Editor at some point in the future, but I just wanted to show you, like, trying to explain the concept of history and how it all works in Maya, that you have different nodes and you can, they all connected together, and you can also clean your history. And when you do that, you basically remove all the previous nodes that was created. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, and please like, comment, or subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you in my next video.